Today's guest presents an opportunity for us to get a true taste of the disc spinning scene that keeps our local nightlife going strong, even in the online era. Stereoculture invites us to question our relationship with music and how that can foster community. Pierre, if the way you listen is the way you create culture, how do you listen? What is your perfect listening experience?
Oh, that's actually a good question. My perfect listening experience, I think, is very much dependent on, I suppose, mood, because the mood dictates. I feel obviously the kind of music that you kind of gravitate towards, or the sound that you gravitate towards at the time. But if I had to break it down and kind of almost really think about it, my perfect listening experience, and this very much, I believe, is the essence and kind of the poetic justice that music can do. And that is just having a bunch of like-minded souls come together and actually enjoy a sound. And it's not prescriptive of a particular genre. So it could be anything from rock to hip-hop to techno to house or whatever. But being able to kind of have that kind of magic moment happen in music where you kind of look around the room and you see a bunch of, smiley faces. To me, that is the perfect kind of listening experience.
I just want to try and connect what you just said there, bro, together with something that we actually spoke about a little, or that you mentioned before we started recording as well. And that's, last night you were at a show and a lot of the young crowd, came out. Now, as someone who's got so much experience and who's been doing this for a very, very long time, right? How do you make sure the younger crowd, is entertained? Because at the same time, you're probably not from the same area as them. So how do you sort of make sure that you're relatable to that crowd while actually not being from that sort of era?
I think the way I always approach that and how I make sure that I relate or that I'm approachable is so this could be from, say, playing music. It could be from hosting a type of event that's obviously music related. That could be actually playing music or talking about music, because that was something that obviously was kind of a pillar within Stereoculture, which is kind of talking about music and what it can do. I think I really think about the programming. So for instance, last night, and we'll use that as a reference because that's what I mentioned to you earlier, Nasiphi, and that is I put in what must have been a good week's work on curating an hour-and-a-half record set, okay? And why I did that is because most of the guys, or a lot of people play, nowadays most people are playing digital. So what happens is when most people play digital, they all kind of purchase their music from literally the same kind of music archives, be that a Beatport, a Bandcamp, all those kind of things. The angle I believe records gives you, and that is kind of when you curate and you purchase, and over the years I've been building a pretty awesome record collection, but that's obviously my opinion. And that is going, okay, well, if I'm going to go and tell a story, well, what's that story got to be? Because I believe every DJ set has got to be a story, because you're taking people from one place and kind of transcend them to another place. And ultimately, generally and I'll use this kind of reference of at the end of your set, you kind of want to land them very softly on the ground again and have a whole bunch of people go, that was an amazing experience. And it always comes that I believe if you play from the heart and you play from the mind, when you kind of do that job, which is, for instance, happened last night, then a lot of people approach you and you have conversations, or they say, like, this was really interesting. I hadn't heard that sound before, or what was that kind of, 12-inch variation of like a Beastie Boys cut that you dropped or whatever, those kind of things. And then I know that I've done my job well, because what I've done is I've exposed them to other sounds which they would generally not have been exposed to. And for all I know today, there's a couple of people that have gone online and are looking at a few new things. So I think that's kind of how I like to kind of program and land it.
Sonically, what would you say, is the difference between playing and using like a record or vinyl and using digital? And I've also heard a term called CDJs. I'm not too sure what that is, so please enlighten me as well on that a bit.
Okay, so I'll start with that last bit of the question. So most people, when they play nowadays, it's either off of what they call a controller or controlling unit, which tends to be kind of your Pioneers and all that kind of thing. And then a CDJ is basically the digital version of a record player, really, which is it gives you infinite control. And you can actually be very creative on it, because you can cut and loop and do a whole lot of things to the music that you're playing. So those are generally what most people play when it comes to digital. Then if you go into kind of the record thing, to me goes back to the very essence of spinning and this kind of started obviously in the early like 70s, 80s in New York and a whole lot of other places all over the world, which is where a bunch of people got together and said, "Well, let's take two turntables and take two records and kind of try and beat match them." And that's kind of how BPM or beat matching was born. And what I really, really like about records compared to like a CDJ or a controller and stuff like that is it's what I call a hands-on experience. And when I was like, you're actually holding the vinyl, you're putting it on the plate, you're kind of setting up there is no digital kind of, I don't want to say cheats, but digital things that you can do, like with a CDJ or a controller. You can auto cue, you can auto BPM, so you can auto beat match. But with records, you have to use your ear. So what you start doing is you kind of think more about the actual construct of how a beat-driven or rhythm-based music is put together, which generally will be on a 4 or 8 or a 12 or a 16 bar. And then you actually got to count those things out, because generally to create or try and put together a good mix, you've got to make sure that you kind of make sure that it's actually beat matching, so that it sounds like it's working with the track that it's being mixed into or mixed out of. And this is one thing my brother, who studied music, actually taught me pretty well, and that is you want to kind of look at the bars. So if you can kind of think about how music is constructed with various emotional bars, if you can kind of play in on that, you can actually get even more of a harmonious mix. So ultimately, I think with vinyl, what I really like is just the fact that you can actually kind of really engage. You can almost, I like the artwork, I like smelling vinyl, I like holding vinyl. Yeah, it's just got a big passion point for me.
Very, very well said there, Pierre. Like you paint a really beautiful picture, man. Shout out.
Sweet.
Should artists that are typically releasing digitally consider getting vinyl cuts of their music as a way to participate in DJ culture? I
think it's almost, I'm going to say that's a 50-50. I think, yes, they should. I don't believe they have to. But over the last couple of years, and I think it's Alice Phoebe Liu. I'll use her as a great South African example. She's gone on to do really incredibly well overseas or internationally too. And that is what a lot of artists do nowadays is they kind of press their own vinyl. So they'll release, it could be a 12-inch, it could be the actual album. And then what happens is if you go to their live gigs and stuff, and this is where I kind of think artists have become very clever, because artists have always, for many, many years, thought about royalties and the record companies taking a lot of their kind of, let's call it their creative talent profits. And now I think a lot of that's come back into the power of the artist. So for instance, like with Alice Phoebe Liu, I went to a gig where she played there on Green Market Square in Cape Town. And it was quite nice because it was kind of in this kind of like church environment or hall environment. But then it was really nice watching her at the end of her concert. She had a little tog bag or kit bag. And then her friends who were obviously working with and helping her, they put a little table out, and then they had some CDs and some records. And I think that's really nice because it talks to kind of delivering your creative offering to the person who's obviously taken a liking to your music or invested in your sound. But at the same time, what I like about kind of records is digital nowadays is imagine a music cover or an album cover living online, but it's sitting on a hard drive. When you're not actually listening to it, or you're not playing it, say, on your computer or your laptop or your iPhone or iPad or whatever, you don't actually see the artwork. But what's nice with the records or some kind of a musical format, I mean, back in the day, it would have been a reel-to-reel, could have been a tape cassette. Actually, tape cassettes are actually kind of cool again too now. And then having that kind of on your bookshelf or lying on your table at home or up against the wall, you kind of get like this kind of the whole design philosophy of music. Because what's really nice about records or music or having been able to showcase the artwork is artists pick that artwork that's very representative of their music style, be it a photo of them, be it nowadays there's a lot of illustration and all kind of cool things happening there, which actually talks to the music. So you kind of almost get another level to the actual music that you're listening to through the visual interpretation.
Is there something in terms of cover art that really affects your decision to give a record like a first listen?
Oh my God, yes. This is once again a great question. I think cover art is actually key. So I'm trying to think of a good reference I'm going to use. I'm going to talk about New Order, who were Joy Division, then obviously became New Order. Once again, one of the greatest electronic bands of all time. But what they did at an early stage in their career, and this is kind of like the mid-80s, kind of going into the early 90s, is they were very, very good. They were one of the first, I believe, who really nailed it when it came to kind of getting designers or working with a great designer. In their case, they worked with a British designer called Peter Saville. And Peter Saville, to date, actually still does some of the most amazing record covers that are out there for artists. But they managed to really kind of, from let's call it a level higher point of view, managed to connect like great design with their music. And that, to me, at that stage of my life was key, because I imagine he has this band producing this new sound, bringing in synths into their music, which was kind of also kind of quite a fresh kind of new way of doing things. But yet the design actually spoke to that. And they were putting like weird things like graphic symbols on their record sleeves, or they did this one album called Substance, which was a phenomenal album. But they had this leaf on the album cover. Now, you wouldn't imagine that a leaf could actually almost portray what actually music is about. But yet when you kind of listen to the album and you got into the music, you could almost kind of imagine, for one of a better word, seasons. And there's a season of love, or there's a season of sorrow, or there's a season of joy. And you could kind of pick that up through the music. So you kind of made this weird kind of higher level connection to the leaf on the album cover. So yeah, I think that does attract you to that, because if it's just all photography, or if it's just all illustration, or it's just kind of like run-of-the-mill, I don't know, direct on creative, I think creative artwork for any artist or music should question the viewer in order to engage them. Because if someone makes another connection to your sound and goes, oh, this is really clever in how they've approached this or done this, I think you've actually unlocked another level of someone's senses to engage with your music.
You know, a question that I often have for some of the DJs that have come on the show, we always get like a different answer to this. I'm not sure there is quite, a right answer. But if you look at, say, a musician, or rather a singer, for example, you will find that maybe something that is sang by, say, Adele would be different to something that is sang maybe by Britney Spears. I'm sorry for the examples, guys. Terrible. But you can hear, the difference in their voice. You can tell them apart. You know what Adele brings to the table. You know what Britney Spears brings to the table. But when it comes to DJs who, predominantly play, other people's music, one of the answers that we've gotten when I asked, what would set Pierre apart? Like, I remember we had a conversation with Baraka, and she was like, it's a DJ's ability, to pull off transitions well. And I think DJ Chachi as well was like, it's the DJ's ability to set the mood and set the tone. According to Pierre, though, what sets Pierre apart? What makes Pierre sort of, different to what maybe someone else would be bringing to the table in terms of, getting a crowd amped and just setting the right tone?
I think in my case, and those answers those references you mentioned are really good ones. Transitioning tone, those are key, because obviously you want to get people happy and engaged with the music. But the angle I think, or I believe that I like to bring, and that is kind of into the programming, that is, I really like to think about coming with, and I'm sure a lot of people say this, that like I'm coming with a different sound. But then most people think their sound's different, but yet obviously if you consider the bigger world of music or DJing especially, where anyone's really got accessibility can access that sound. But I think if you think about how you put your set together, you inherently create a unique sound. Be that in the construct, which is, okay, I'm going to start at, 122 BPM and I'm going to end up at 130 BPM, or I'm going to start at 122 BPM and end up at 118 BPM. But what's my journey going to be from there? Because what I like about DJ sets, and in the older days, guys like Laurent Garnier, which is kind of one of the greatest all-time DJs, I believe, they used to play 8-hour sets. Now imagine people don't do that anymore, because now, especially dance music or clubbing culture has become so big, and culture has changed, and that people want on a lineup, especially from, I think, a lot of music venues or parties or events, people want more DJs or more people on a lineup, because obviously it gives them a lot more flexibility in enjoying the experience. So therefore your set times have gone from like, say, 8 hours down to like 1 hour, 1.5 hours. So in order to land, and this every DJ I think can say, and that is, in order to land your sound, now you have to be a little bit clear on how you're going to approach that and then delivering that experience, because you've got a shorter time to tell a story. So what is that story going to be, and how am I going to land it? So I definitely think the construct is key for me.
Very well said, man. And before we started the show as well, we were just chatting, Meagan and I, and she obviously alerted me to the fact that Stereoculture used to be a venue arts in Cape Town. So if we can maybe touch a bit more on that there in terms of looking at Stereoculture as a venue, what did it sort of take, to pull off, something or...
Okay.
Yeah, to pull off something like that.
Yeah, so it took a lot to pull it off because... So for years of my life, I always wanted to do a music venue. And I didn't just want to come and open another bar or another this or a club. I wasn't actually thinking of going into that space. When I was living overseas, and there's good ones in London, there's one in Milan, there's one in Barcelona, and I wanted to kind of create like what they call a listening room type experience, which is where it's music, but there's many layers to the music. And that inherently became the big idea within Stereoculture. Because the stereo of the word stereoculture obviously immediately takes you to music, because music's generally thought of as stereo or sounds coming from different sides. But then I wanted to marry the culture bit. And I think that's almost that juxtaposition moment within the name. And this is something we managed to do quite cleverly when we started Stereoculture here. And that is, I wanted to take music, but there's a thing called politics in music, especially in clubbing culture or DJing culture. And I want to transcend that. I want to be able to take house to, techno, to hip hop, to rock and roll, because we actually almost had, the one night we had a mosh pit basically in Stereoculture, which was kind of weird, but it was actually such an amazing experience for someone who would not normally have been exposed to that kind of music genre style or that music experience. And being able to deliver that, because ultimately what Stereoculture, the intention of Stereoculture was to bring a music experience to people that they would not normally have been exposed to. And if I think about the likes like Black Congo, Dale, Modular, doing collaborations with them, to some of my favorite DJs like a Bruno or a Graham Hector or G-Force, and just bringing all these people together to kind of just collaborate, because collaboration is once again straight into the concept of Stereoculture. And we started doing interesting things where we had people coming in, we'd be talking about music and we're thinking, okay, could we do art? So what we started doing is we started building in art. Once again, this can kind of almost go back to record covers to a certain point, but going, okay, well, if art's so integral to music, we started having live artists perform at DJ sets or various venues at Stereoculture in the space. And that was really interesting because you saw artists creating kind of these emotive levels of expression to music, but the music that was actually going on the sound system. So those were key things for Stereoculture. And sadly, in my case, or our case, which is my brother, Jean, JD, who's also DJ with the two brothers, or as we call ourselves, the Brothers O, doing Stereoculture, COVID came along. And we managed to make the first round of COVID, we made the second round of COVID, and then post the third round of COVID, I just couldn't anymore, because what was happening is we kept getting these bloody waves and we weren't allowed to have people together, because the worst thing about COVID was having people together in a room, and if they're socializing and having no mask and having a good time, that was just like a big no-no because that was like death. So ultimately we got to a stage where I had to close the space, which was a very, very sad thing to do. And I kind of went through like a bit of a metamorphosis after that, because we were like, okay, well, how do we take the concept of Stereoculture and kind of try and find clever ways of pushing that? There are many, many ways that works too. And that is kind of like the rebirth or the drawing. So we've gone into collaborations, looking at how we can do things there. And hopefully the road ahead will be a sweet one on that. But then also I've got a big component of my approach to music is design and giving back to the community. So a very good friend of mine, Ivan Turuninjan, as most people know him, he's a great DJ, but also used to run Red Bull Music South Africa. I worked a lot with him on doing a few things for Bridges for Music. Okay, so on Bridges for Music, I kind of helped Ivan, and this is all doing stuff for free, but it's not about doing it for free. It's about doing it because you love it, which is how do you build the community and do interesting things for the community. So inherently, Stereoculture is living and is still out there in kind of other ways, and we'll see where we can take that in the future.
What made you choose to start your broadcast series with the collaboration with Darren Statler and Vinyl Diggs?
So people that you kind of really kind of generally in music or in any form of, I suppose, art or any field, you meet people that just have a like-minded passion or love for what you do. And those are the people you tend to gravitate towards when it comes to collaboration. And what I like about collaboration, in this case, working with Pierre vinyl gigs or doing stuff with them, or going on to Darren Statler with these concepts of linked, is they're almost like totally two different sides of the spectrum of music, because Pierre has got this amazing knowledge and passion. He's been doing it for years, where he kind of really also does vinyl and different genres from disco to house, but he really has got a good approach to music. And then on the other hand, you kind of got this younger, fresh blood that's coming into the industry, which is also kind of creating changes and norms, which once again looks into that kind of cycles of life of music, and how inherently people naturally move things forward. And I like the idea of kind of being tapped into both and going, okay, well, if we can do things together, it helps both parties, because you're both kind of talking from the same passion point of view, but at the same time, if you join forces, you can kind of throw your net a little bit wider and kind of plug into other communities and different experiences. And I think that's important.
And in terms of newcomers, how can they work towards things like residencies or just make a good impression in terms of an introduction to the scene?
I think there's quite a few things that newcomers can do, and I call them the kids. I mean, but yet, like I told you earlier on, I'm a kid myself. I mean, for me, music and working with people is like being a kid in a sweet shop, because there's just so many cool colors and flavors and things that you can do with collaboration and people. But what I think young people or fresh blood and newcomers are really good at doing is they've got their finger on the pulse, man. And I'm blown away a lot of the times by this. If people are creating content for their social platforms to kind of get their voice out there as an artist or a DJ, then you look at actually from a SoundCloud point of view to, I don't know, emailers, getting on blogs, doing cool things, or just sometimes you might walk into a random venue, and it could be Cape Town or Joburg or anywhere in the world really, and then there's a cassette that's lying on your table, or there's a little bookshelf with some freebies, and it could be a music zine. And then you start kind of just plugging in and going, there is so much out there. And that's that fresh blood. So I've got a lot of respect because how innovative, because we all know that when you're kind of going into something or starting something new, it's very difficult to cut through the clutter because there's a lot of noise out there, because there's a lot of good people out there. But I think what's very, very important, and this is something I'd really like to land with this question you've asked, and that is never give up. Just know that you might start off with the smallest voice, but it could be a year, it could be 6 months, it could be 6 years down the line. And you might turn around and look back at your story and you've got this amazing journey that you've just unpacked, but you've also become so strong as a person and as an artist, really.
You know, looking at the fact that you're obviously based in Cape Town, man, what is the environment like that side? Because I'm personally from Durban. I've never been to Cape Town. Meags is out in Joburg. So for anyone who maybe hasn't been to Cape Town, what is the scene like there for someone who's a DJ?
Joburg for me has got like an always-on approach, be that from your clubs to the people that work there and things they do, because Joburg's Joburg, it's like 24/7. It's kind of our New York of South Africa, really. But Cape Town is always, and Durban's actually like this too, I presume, because I grew up in Durban for a couple of years. I kind of get your vibe a bit there, you know what I mean? But even though I was like wet behind the ears then, but it's a bit of more of a seasonal kind of holiday type approach. So what happens is in season, there seems to be a lot more going on versus kind of winter or the quiet time. So I think that has a big impact on what happens. But one of the best things I can talk about, and that is especially currently where I think things are happening post-COVID, is there's a lot of burning kind of energy and fresh ideas of people doing things and wanting to get together and wanting to collaborate and wanting to do events, wanting to play in bands, which I believe is creating a lot more of a voice. And I actually think there's a lot going on right now. And I think as we're going back into kind of summer coming up, finally we expect that there's going to be a lot more tourists coming back to South Africa or coming to Cape Town too, because now kind of that whole COVID thing is hopefully, fingers crossed, done and dusted. So I think that energy and excitement of people knowing all of this is coming up is creating a lot of like great buzz. And I'll talk a little bit to kind of music fragmentation or genres a bit, and that is from a party scene, dance scene, there's a lot going on, festivals, Africa Burn, they just recently had the first Africa Burn again post-COVID, which I heard was a total amazing experience. And they're already talking about doing next year's one. And then I look at this friend of mine, Paul, who's got this little music venue, well, kind of bar / cafe called the House of Machines in Cape Town. And he does a lot of kind of like hip-hop DJs to like your kind of normal band type mentality that you think when it comes to bands performing and singing and playing live instruments. So there's a lot of protagonists out there right now, and that gets me really excited. And I think that's really cool.
You know, what you just said there is similar to something that Wade Flowday said in his episode, and that there's sort of like this resurgence after COVID and such. You know, people are coming out, they're going out, they're partying. Even event organizers are, you know, more willing to collaborate and go all in and just go full send.
Yeah.
And not sort of just half-ass things. Would you say this is as a result of maybe the fact that we've sort of been locked indoors because of, you know, lockdown, and it might maybe, you know, die out somewhere along the line? Or would you say this is something that is very sustainable?
Well, I'm going to go that it is sustainable, okay, because I believe coming out of COVID, I think a pandemic, I mean, in my lifetime, I never even considered that I'd go through a pandemic. And I think all of us can literally 100% say the same thing there. And what's interesting about being locked up in your room and someone kind of saying you can't come out of your room for 6 months versus I'm going to lock you in your room and you can't come out for like 2.5 years, you know, there's a big difference. But if you happen to pop your head out the room, you might die, because that die thing was quite strong with COVID. And I think that to me is why there's such a almost like a zest for life to a certain point of view, where people are celebrating as human beings coming together. It can simply be a family braai or a barbecue, having some music playing in the background, or people just connecting and going out into the mountains and climbing and having fun, or camping, into actually people partying and having a great time. Because I think what COVID did is it let us realize that the chase for the happy dream necessarily is not always the right thing. Still chase your dream and have a good life. But we as humans, I think relationships, friendships, parents, friends, good times, those have become important again. And that to me is kind of the exciting bit, which I hope will actually not stop. I hope it will actually get stronger into the future, because I think we all need to realize that the dream is not always the right thing, because daily happiness within our lives is probably a better thing when it comes to happiness and enjoying people.
So if music events are kind of going through this renaissance, and the collective mindset is something that you want to see kept, what changes would you like to see in this new period?
I think the word will be growth, fun, and also people who've got access to the tools, being able to perhaps share those tools a little bit more with other people, so that we can kind of enable a better kind of industry or an industry growth. And once again, based on when we talk about music, there's so many genres in it across the board. That would be my answer there. And also kind of coming up with fresh, cool content and ideas, and people kind of going, let's break the norm, let's try to do things differently. I think that's always a nice thing. And also look at how you can kind of reinvent yourself. I think that's also important, or people reinventing themselves or their stories too. I think those things are taking us into our next period. I think that's exactly where we want to be.
So I want to know you now on a personal level. Obviously, DJing is what you basically do. If you're not behind the decks, what can we sort of find you doing?
Okay, so Nasiphi, like DJ for me is like, I'm not like, you know, like all these professional DJs out there. I just do it purely here and there because it's a love I have. So it's more of a niche offering. But me as a person, like in getting to know me better, my time is really spent around kind of working within the communication space. So just call it advertising or communications or marketing. And that is always trying to do interesting things around there, which is my career has been all over the world, living all over the world doing marketing or advertising. And that has obviously just been fueled as my kind of second tier level by my love of music. And then whilst I'm doing that, I'm going to say plugging into kind of the collaboration space. So I do a lot of visual work for some other events or parties and people and friends. I did that. I used that Bridges for Music reference earlier. So I like the visual component really strongly, which when it comes to expression. And then I've got a great love for books. My two big loves are music and books. I'm not a great TV person. Make no mistake, I still enjoy fresh content, be it through Netflix or something, or digging into cool docies, or now and again some kind of, happy space movie like Dune or whatever, like things that get me kind of going. But I spend a lot of my time reading, and I absorb primarily through books And then obviously I've got some kind of, like, I suppose, digital platforms that I subscribe to for kind of interesting things. But I love discovering cool information. That's kind of stuff that gets me going.
I feel like you've hit yourself a gold mine there, bro, because, I mean, you do the marketing thing, obviously, and then you obviously have the DJing side of it. Do you ever find that you know, maybe you utilize some of the skills, you know, that you use when it comes to marketing, and then you basically utilize those onto the DJing side of things and vice versa?
Oh, yes. Hey? So what happens is, and this was also very much part of Stereoculture, and that is when we curate or when I put the space together, and a lot of people that came into the space were like, wow, this, you can really see there's a lot of love here. And that love came through in the actual space. I'm not going to say I'm an eco-activist, but at the same time, I try to recycle. So when I actually built the space, and a lot of people couldn't probably notice it, or some did, and that is I recycled. I didn't go to buy new furniture, for instance. I spent a year before opening the venue kind of collecting old kind of like 70s kind of like recycled Danish furniture and like kind of fixing it and stuff. And then kind of on the art side, a lot of the art, or let's call it the design and posters and things that I had in Stereoculture, which is also my personal taste, was a lot of activism art. So, for instance, Shepard Fairey from a Bay, who most people know, or is one of the, apart from Banksy, I suppose he's probably the more underground kind of like great art / music activists, and then into kind of showcasing a little bit of the visual kind of layout of the place with kind of, there's an artist called Tycho I've got a lot of time and respect for, who does really innovative stuff within the music space. He actually knows how to market the, excuse my language, beep, beep, beep out of himself. He's so good at it. And he does a lot of personal releasing, doing interesting stuff with content. So I try to showcase a bit of that. And then street culture. So street culture I brought through in the space with, I've got a great love for skateboarding, and not saying that I'm a skateboarder. Yes, I can kind of go down the road and do kind of move on a board, but I like the idea of skateboards being kind of repurposed as art canvases to kind of show beautiful things. So I had a lot of that kind of stuff floating around. And then the other juxtaposition to the whole thing was also the love of technology and how music instruments or music things have kind of helped us express or enjoy music. So I had some old hi-fis and tape recorders and reel-to-reels and all these things scattered all over the space. And that was quite nice. Those are key components with that. And then I'm going to touch on one more thing, if I may, and that is we did this collaboration actually at the Stereoculture venue. It happened to be with Pierre from Vinyl Things. But what we did was we looked at clubbing culture in Cape Town kind of in the early 80s, and then we put a retrospective together. So Pierre went and kind of spoke to a lot of different people, and he managed to get some amazing old clubbing photography of the Cape Town scene. And what we did is we had that printed up, and we actually had 2 or 3 gallery exhibitions where we showcased this. So, and then what we did is we took like some early 80s DJ mixes on cassettes, and we had these little tape recorders with earphones laid around the venue. And it was quite nice because people came there in the day and even at night. And then what happens is they could have a cup of coffee and they could enjoy like this kind of, let's call it awareness or induction into kind of the history of their town, of music. And then with another really good close friend of mine who's an art guru, a guy called Sean O'Toole, he's involved where he's got this kind of like punk, ska, weird, like abstract rock band, but that is purely his arty, weird side, as I call it. But then working with some of the artists in Cape Town, we called it a music event. But what we did is we had music with a band and choking, but then we created art and we had live artists painting. Then we had a collaboration with this little independent art bookshop that we brought in, and they had a little stall and they were kind of selling books and kind of getting artists to sell some of this stuff. So it's kind of just mashing it all together. And I like the idea of mashing things together, because when you mash it together, it creates a unique new experience.
From what you're saying, like, it seems like you play the role of curator in multiple spaces. So what I want to know is, what does that look like in a time where a lot of our taste is prompted to us, prescribed to us by things like algorithms?
Oh, wow. Excuse me. Sorry, I didn't say that. That's a really, really good fucking question, eh? But I think humans make the best algorithms. You know what I mean? I think we are force-fed so much stuff. I mean, how often are you chatting to yourself or to a friend And then all of a sudden, 2 minutes later on your Instagram, this post pops up on, I don't know, Doc Martens or Nike sneakers or Adidas or something weird, or a book that you might have mentioned. Also, you're like, hey, isn't it weird how your phone kind of like shows you stuff that you kind of spoke about? And those algorithms and weird things, as much as they are created by humans, but then they kind of do their own thing, I think there's nothing nicer than humans being their own algorithms, because there's a lot more intent and there's a lot more heart and there's a lot more love that comes from that. And I'm very much that person. I suppose if you think about my star sign and the way I am with people, I'm a people's person. So I'm Gemini, but I really transcend both sides. And that is, I'm a better person when I'm collaborating or engaging with people. And I'm like most people know me as the eternal optimist. A volcano could be exploding in front of me and I'll find something weird to do. You know what I mean? I'll be like, come on, let's go and take a look. It's going to be really cool when we get to the top. And I think I carry that ethos in everything that I do, because I've just got this weird buzz or energy, which is very much me, where I try not to ever give up, because there's no point giving up, you know what I mean? Because then you're just going to kind of fade away into the woodwork. And ever more so as kind of I move forward in life, I realize that it could be a Carpe Diem type moment or thing where you've got to kind of make things happen. If you try and make things happen, you'll be surprised at how energy attracts energy. So I really do believe that when my mantra or philosophy in life is that your energy introduces you before you do. So if you're putting out a good energy and a good vibe, someone's going to pick up on it, and you'll be surprised where that journey can take you. So that's actually the algorithm.
It reminds me of basically an episode that we did with Vanna, who's an artist, like an alt sort of artist as well. And he was basically saying that his influence, a bit of his influence came from the background at home and such, like his folks played a bit of a role in him making music and such. And you obviously mentioned your brother as well, initially or near the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
So how much of this actually like runs in the family, growing up and such, you being a DJ today?
Oh, actually a lot. You know that if I think about like my parents and let's say home family life, it actually comes from my mother. My mother she lived for music. My mother, if I sat and snapped my fingers, my mother would put her arms in the air and she'd start dancing. She loved music that much and it made her happy. But I was very, very lucky, and this is kind of mid-80s. Growing up at that stage, we had moved from Durban actually back up to Pretoria, or in Pretoria. So now I'm kind of doing schooling there. But my mother, what she was really good at is she attracted kind of let's call it the weird people in society. So most of my mother's friends were all gay people. And I grew up, and in those days, also clubbing scene was very gay orientated. So what happened is a lot of the DJs who were friends with my mother, they actually turned out to be great DJs in these clubs. Now, remember, this is pre-social media, pre-everything. So there weren't many venues like there are now. And in those days also, like the clubs were far and few. There'd be like in Pretoria, like 2 or 3, and then in Joburg, in kind of Hillbrow, there'd be 2 or 3, and obviously Cape Town I had seen. But naturally through my mother's friends, I kind of got introduced into the clubbing thing. And also in those days, you couldn't just go. There were probably like 1 or 2 places where you could go buy a really good 12-inch. We were living in an apartheid-based country, but at the same time, we were also sanctioned from the world for, let's call it this most ridiculous rule most countries ever made to run its own self, which is making a law on apartheid. And so within those confines, it was kind of trying to get edgy culture, or trying to get like weird music or anti-establishment or LGBT type Q weird things happening back then. In that all these rules that were kind of placed around us and I was young, you know what I mean? And that inherently fed into my love of music, because I realized that is something that actually celebrates, and this is very much the essence of music, I believe, which is to be free, which is to accept people as they are, to love people unconditionally, and to try and build all of that into music. So from how family impacted on that, very much my mother and her friends. And then that also fed through into my brother. My brother's younger than me, but where I kind of always had music in my life, but I focused on kind of like let's call it the visual side of communication, and kind of playing within art and design and graphic design and all these things. My brother, he kind of back in his day was actually a really good DJ. So he used to play with, I think it's Roger Deluxe, and him, and they used to be known as Milk and Sugars. And in those days, also in the early kind of house scene or electronic scene, come early 90s, going towards kind of the year 2000, when the electronic music was like really kicking off all over the world. And the party scene, they were kind of pretty much my friends who kind of founded that scene, like Graham Hector, House Africa Records, Tim White, Donna, Christos, DJ Christos, everyone knows, and he's still a great music activist. He still does amazing things. And also really, to me, changed the norm on cross-culture pollination of kind of like township beats into house music and all these amazing things. That came inherently from that too, from family almost. That just happened to become my music family. And those souls who I still connect with, and some people have obviously gone overseas and are doing amazing things, but ultimately it came from my family environment of being told music is a really good thing, try and make the most of it and get into it, because it's one of the few things that's going to make you happy.
I'm glad you actually did some name dropping there, because what you'll find is that there may be a lot of like unsung heroes. So what I want to know is, from back in the day, are there any sort of DJs that you knew that were just doing the most, but maybe didn't end up getting the same kind of recognition as, say, Christos or whatever the situation may be?
Yeah.
If so, just drop us some names, man. Some of the really good guys from back then that aren't in the limelight necessarily.
Well, they were. Hey, they in the early days of Joburg, I'm going to go 92, 93, 95, somewhere around there. And this is kind of really when I was a student studying art, as I would have done. And the music scene kind of kicking off. There was, on the Joburg scene, with the electronic music just kicking off, the first kind of really like pivotal tipping point moment in the new genre of acid, techno, or not even techno, let's just call it electronic music and clubbing and weird shit going down, was Fourth World in Joburg, which is kind of down there at N Street and stuff. And then they had some amazing DJs. And like I say, Tim White, he was fantastic. He might not be known like a Christos, or even Graham Hector G-Force, who's one of the best DJs in the country, and he's a really close friend of mine. But he didn't do it for like the PR side. He did it because, and he still does it because he's an absolute amazing person who just loves music. And then you had a guy called Pedro, who was also like a really good DJ back in those days. And I don't know, actually, if I think about it now, I don't know where he's netted out, but I'm sure he's probably out there still with an amazing record collection at home. And then if I move thinking my mind to kind of like the Pretoria scene, there was a guy called Brendan. So there used to be there were two really good clubs. There was a club called Limelight, which was kind of groundbreaking at the time in the early 80s or late 80s. And then into late 80s, early 90s, a club called Buckaroos. This guy called DJ Brendan, he used to play there. I think he lives in New York now. And I think he ended up in the IT space or something because he was a very clever guy. But he was a really, really good DJ. And he was kind of playing these new kind of like fresh beats, and he was combining hip hop and, kind of trying to showcase different genres in music. And I really liked that component. And then there were also some weird people that perhaps we don't tend to think of as music activists or cool people doing cool things with music. And I'm going to mention one particular character, and this happened to be in Pretoria. At one stage, flea markets used to be a really big thing in South Africa, where people used to go on a Saturday or Sunday to a shopping center, and they'd take a car park and they'd kind of put all their stalls up. But there was this one guy called Jan, and this guy, he really did, I think, a lot for music in the sense of, especially young students, the youth. They didn't have the money to go and buy an expensive 150, 200 Rand CD or whatever. And this guy used to, and I'm not saying it's a good thing, but what he'd do is he'd go overseas, and then what he'd do is he'd find all this cool new music and he'd bring it back to South Africa. And then he'd actually put these mixtapes together. And these mixtapes kind of, you could buy, I think it was 5 Rand or 10 Rand. But what you do is if you got to know him and you got to know your music taste, you'd kind of go to him and you'd go, I've just been overseas 6 months ago, 3 months ago, and I think you're going to like this. So he was really good, I think, for a lot of people, introducing him to different music genres. And I know for a fact that there was some person called Mr. X in Joburg or Miss X in Joburg doing the same thing. There was another person in Cape Town doing the same thing. And then from the art side also, in the music scene or kind of the new clubbing culture, there was a lady called Mill who had this cool kind of tie-dye, weird hippie type music art shop thing going on in Joburg, in Rocky Street, and like interesting things. So, and those people kind of, in their own right, were kind of music activists, I believe, because they were trying to deliver a new kind of sound. And it just happened to be a beat-driven, kind of more clubbing sound, which ultimately 20 years down the line has become a business now globally.
You know, I'm thoroughly enjoying this sort of like history lesson, you know, and I don't want to completely like, you know, keep going, but just one more question from my end, just looking at that aspect, you know, because you'll find that not everyone is making music, you know, for mainstream success, right?
Yes.
And you'll find that sometimes the people that are in the mainstream, perhaps maybe got there by chance, or maybe it wasn't their intention. Maybe for some it was their intention and such. But what would you say is actually the difference between some of the people that you just mentioned now and someone like, you know, Christos, as we mentioned, who has obviously enjoyed, you know, a very long career in the limelight and such? Because I don't suppose it's a matter of quality, because the people that you just mentioned, I'm sure if you had to go back in time, you know, they were probably doing things that are incredible, that are on the same level as his or better, you know. So what would you say the difference is between the guys that actually made it into the mainstream and the guys that actually, you know, just sort of didn't really make it, you know, into the mainstream as such?
Yeah. So once again, I like the question. So I think there's two different kind of musicians, all right? Musicians that know how to work with people and market themselves and are the limelight, which is, for one of a better word, in brackets, all your kind of famous people. Then there are many, many, many untold stories of music geniuses who were really, really, really talented and were innovators in, I don't know, keyboard, electronic music, synthesizers and instrumentation and stuff like that, and just great artists in their own right. They just don't have that capability or capacity they don't want to be famous. They do it purely because they've got a passion for it. There is no end goal. The end goal isn't to get, let's say, there's no prize at the end of the rainbow for them. They don't do it for that reason. They do it because they purely just want to do it, and they just want to put something out there, and if someone likes it or not, that actually does not matter. And I say that hesitantly because I think any artist wants their art form to be appreciated by someone. But overall, those are the unsung heroes that are out there. Do you know what I mean? And if I may, I'm going to quickly reference something because it sparked off a thought in my head. There's a really famous sound engineer in our country. He actually lives in Durban, by the way, down on the south coast. He's one of our most kind of, I'd say, if not globally famous sound engineers who no one knows about in South Africa. So David, I'll talk about this story a little bit. So his music archive is at the archive in Stellenbosch. So the Stellenbosch University has got one of the best music archives in the country, where they take like famous labels or crazy things that people did in South Africa in the music history of South Africa, and they archive it for prosperity. And this woman who runs it, Zwane, she's amazing. If ever you go to Stellenbosch, try and go visit the music archives. They will really open your eyes. But anyway, David was the sound engineer that we all remember the Woodstock Festival. Everyone in the world knows about the original Woodstock Festival that happened, which was like the biggest music hippie festival ever. David was one of the sound engineers, a South African guy at that festival. And then what happened is David is a serious music activist. Like the stuff this guy did for music in South Africa, no one knows about. But then David, after the Woodstock Festival, he decided to come back to South Africa. And there was a very famous sound guy in America who used to do sound systems and do all these big shows back in those days in America. When David came back to South Africa in the apartheid regime, he wanted to be a music activist, and he did. So he created this label called Third Year Recordings, but indirectly, there weren't sound systems in South Africa. So this guy that David worked with in America, they knew that they couldn't you couldn't import a sound system into South Africa because the ruling party at that time in the country, it was banned, it was illegal. You know, you couldn't have these things called sound systems that were going to change people's programming and kind of change the norms in our country. But anyway, so David and this guy figured out a way to get the sound system into South Africa, that they broke the sound system down into individual components, posted it, each piece, and then when the sound system arrived in South Africa, David rebuilt it. And then this sound system, David installed in an old VW van, Combi, And he's literally spent 20 years of his life going through South Africa to the furthest reaches of townships, mountains, you name it. And he was recording all these underground African artists, which is what third ear recordings is known for. He broke new ground. So David is the guy that discovered Johnny Clegg and Savuka. He was doing in the 1970s or 80s, I can't remember now, I think it's 70s, David did the first freedom music concert in South Africa, which is where he brought music activists together at the Wits University in Johannesburg. And they started fighting the rights of human beings to all be accepted as normal people and not be judged on the color of our skin. So do you know what I mean? Those are the unsung heroes. And interestingly, I work with some friends now, film director, film guy, and with Lazon, this woman who looks after David's music archive. And we went and filmed him in Durban, and we're still busy working on doing this documentary on him. But so once again, you can see there, I've got another passion, which is storytelling again. But ultimately, what I'm just trying to say is there are amazing people out there who don't do it because they want to be famous. They just do it because they believe it's what they're meant to do.
Just one more comment before I pass on to Meagan is that I'm actually glad you brought up the fact that, you know, there's a documentary that's in the works, because it's something I was about to comment on. Like, I really wish, you know, there was a documentary out there that covered some of these things. But at the same time, I'm actually grateful, you know, that you've gotten this opportunity to talk to you, because all this knowledge and such as well is an opportunity for people to actually find out about those people who are the unsung heroes as well. So shout out to the work that you're doing, man.
And their respect, and likewise to you. Just the mere fact that you guys have got this platform and you're kind of talking about the art, and obviously the arts being music, film, whatever it is. Same thing there. I think the one thing we must instill in the youth, and which is something I believe we should all do, and that is pass the passion on, because the more passionate you are about something, the more you're going to want to explore it. And what happens is if you explore it, that's when the magic happens, because then you discover the books, the music, the history, the photos, you know, the recordings that no one heard, and all that kind of crazy stuff. And I think we need to get cleverer at that, because I think the way the world has shifted and moved is that it's so easy to just click a button and be force-fed content, rather than actually dig into something and do a bit of research and actually discover that there's a plethora of things on your doorstep, in South Africa on music, and you can take that so much further.
So can I ask if it's sort of part of your mission to make the South African scene more visible or more accessible, then is it in the DJs of South Africa to find ways to work in more local music into their sets?
Yeah, so once again, good question, and I believe that is happening. So if you look, and we did a few collaborations now through Stereoculture, where we worked with Black Congo, Brendan, we worked with a guy called Dale, and what I've noticed is, and there's quite a few people out there in the scene, and that is, what I really, really like is that if you look at from a production point of view, there's a lot of stuff that you can find online now, especially on Beatport and some of the platforms out there, where South African engineers and studio recordings and artists are doing really, really good things. And that is kind of, for want of a better word, kind of broadcasting kind of that. Black Coffee is a really good example, by the way, who's kind of taken the African component or the South African component of music and kind of broadcast it or globalized it to the world. And there are a lot of people, I think, doing that. So that's really nice and interesting to hear, because that knowledge. There's another DJ I wanted to talk, Paul Waxon. Paul Waxon is a really good DJ. He does good things with that. So I think it's Paul and Pierre. You know that they push Kwaito a lot. Kwaito is an interesting genre because it was actually very, very progressive. And there's a lot of recordings that were done which no one knew about, or that have kind of faded into the woodwork. And then anyway, Pierre went on this journey of discovering Kwaito, and he came across this record collection of Kwaito pressings that he's actually trying to repress them at this moment. He's on a mission to repress these records to get them back into circulation because they're so fresh. But the weird thing is, you wouldn't think like Carpe is enjoyed by a lot of people in a global audience. And I'll use an example. So Pierre spends every year, he goes to Berlin for about 2 or 3 months. And what happens is he actually plays quite a bit of Kwaito, and you'll be surprised how German people love Kwaito, because it's got this like kind of weird, abstract, offbeat kind of rhythm going on, and you can kind of do a different kind of dance to it. And inherently, what I love about that is there's a music activist in his own kind of weird way, just trying to do things differently. But It's about just getting that sound out there, really. And I think everyone has got their sound, and it's actually kind of a nice way to kind of wrap this up. And that is, find your sound, then figure out ways of getting your sound out there, and keep that as your kind of compass, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And that sound could be visual, it could be audio, it could be whatever it is. But as long as it's dealing with your passion of love of music and kind of cool stuff like that, just keep doing it.
Pierre, I just want to thank you, on behalf of myself and Meagan, Sludge Underground. It's been a really awesome episode. It's been an awesome chat. It's been super wholesome. And thank you just, for spending time with us, taking time aside to do this. We highly appreciate this and everything that you come with.
Oh, dude. And likewise, hey, because I remember when you first reached out to me, and I knew it was a little while before we were going to do this. And then it's when one of our life kind of gets caught up. And then when the moment presented itself today, and like I told you, I didn't have a late night, I had a semi-late night last night. And once we started and we just started talking, it feels like, it's like kind of like the gates opened, and I could honestly talk forever, because I told you in the beginning, I love people and I love talking. But thank you once again. It's been an absolute honor. And just keep the love, keep doing what you're doing. All right.
Thank you so much, sir. We definitely will. And always remember that, bro, like Sludge Underground wouldn't be a thing, without the artists and everyone that comes through to tell their story. So really appreciate it. Now, handles for anyone who wants to get in touch with you or collab, where do you find you online?
You can go to Stereoculture, obviously on Instagram. That's a great way to reach out to me. A good one to get hold of me on is just, you can email me at stereoculture@icloud.com. I think that's a good one that everyone will remember. It's easy.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much there, Pierre. And obviously, for anyone who's listening to this episode, our stuff is available on our website. It's at www.sludgeunderground.com. And on social media, it's at Sludge Underground on Instagram and Facebook, and at Sludge031 on Twitter. And guys, it's been another wholesome episode. I want to thank Pierre once again for being with us on this episode. And to you who has been listening to this, highly appreciate it. Until next time, let's bye for now.
Joy-filled experience, gladness and beliefs. You release the burden of old. You accept the new ideas and truths. The life loves you and wants you to have only the best. The love, the life. Joy-filled experience, gladness and beliefs. You release the burden of old. You accept the new ideas and truths. The life loves you and wants you to have only the best. The love, the life. The love, the life. The love, the life. The love, the life. Joy-filled experience. Glad and beliefs. You release the burden. Of all. You accept the new ideas. And truth. The life loves you. The life and wants you to have only the best. The love, the life. Joy-filled experience. Gladness and beliefs. You release the burden of old. You accept the new ideas and truths. The life loves you and wants you to have only the best. Joy-filled experience. Gladness and beliefs. You release the burden of old. You accept the new ideas and truths. The life loves you and wants you to have only the best. Only the best. Only the best.